Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This webinar is going to be a question and answer session using some user-submitted questions. We have these from time to time, so if you have questions, make sure that you set them aside, and we will be sending out a request for questions for future sessions. Today we have Denise McKinley. She is with us today from Inside Sales, and Aaron Hall is with us from Tech Support. My name is Chad, and I am in Product Management. We offer online and in-person training. Please go to the 2020 website where you can find more information about those programs there.
Okay, as Chad said, my name is Denise, and I am a pre-sale specialist here at 2020. I'm going to address three of basically the groups of questions that came in. One of the first ones was basically working with specials and working with 3D graphics. So I'm going to kind of step you through today how I would go about doing that. Probably one of the easiest ways to do this is if you can use an existing symbol from any of the manufacturers, you can modify those and create a custom item out of them, and you can also work with their 3D symbol at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and start by pulling in a work surface. One of the tools that we have inside of the CAP Designer program is the ability to copy plan to 3D, and you'll see in a minute why I'm going to do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and place it right above the other symbol. So now I've got my 2D and my 3D, and I'm going to use a command. Here we go. Okay, so from my menu here, I'm going to actually undo this cap part. So I'm going to select both objects. Now, if you'll notice at the command line here, it says when I undo cap part, if I want to remove the cap attributes. And I'm going to, it defaults to no, and I'm going to leave it at no. And the reason I'm going to do this is because one of the other questions that we had gotten was how to create a custom part, but be able to keep the standard material options when I go into Worksheet. So by saying no here, it's going to allow me to do that. So now that I've undone the part, you'll notice that now we just have a CapTG, which is a nice visual indicator that I have undone that part. I am actually going to modify this part, and I'm going to modify the 3D at the same time. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a stretch. What I'm going to do is make sure that I do include the grommet, because if I don't include the entire grommet, it's actually going to stretch it, and it's not going to look correct. We're going to stretch the object. So let's just go ahead and select them. I'm going to pick a base point, and then I'm going to tell it to stretch 2 inches and enter. Okay, now that I have modified the parts, so I've done the 2D and the 3D at the same time, I'm actually going to turn it back into a cap part. So we're going to go ahead and select New. I'm going to select first the plan view. Now, because this is an object that came, or a furniture object or whatever, that came out of an existing manufacturer symbol, I do already have an insertion point, and that's what the X is in the upper left-hand corner. If I wanted to choose a different selection point, I would do that by picking the point. I'm going to select my 3D object, which obviously we know is the one up here on the top. Once again, our base point is already selected for us. You want to make sure that your Z height is set to 0, so this comes in correctly. I'm going to select Next. Once I select that Next, you're going to see the information that's going to be part of your new cap part. So you're going to have your manufacturer code. You'll notice your catalog code has an asterisk in it, but we've also modified the part number to have the word special in front of it. So if you need to modify anything in here, certainly do that at this point. We turned this into a 50, so I might want to change the tag on this. And if you have a price, any of that information, you can certainly do that. Also, I can assign options manually here, but in this exercise, what I was showing is how we can do this using standard materials. So when I say Next, I can save it into a custom catalog, because if I should need to use this again, I would have the ability to do that. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is generate a worksheet so that we can see how that will behave. And I'm going to say Next, and let's just go ahead. We're going to have 2 objects in here because I do have the 3D. And when it opens up in Worksheet, you will notice that it will have a different color than standard product does. It will be yellow because that's an indicator that it has come from, that it's a special and it's being stored in a custom catalog. But you'll see that I do have the little paint palette over here that would allow me to actually come in here and choose the manufacturer's finishes. So I could then come in here and select finishes just like I do with a standard product. And when I finish, I have an orderable product at this point. Custom fabrics and finishes, how to bring those in, or how to apply those finishes to items within visual impression. So we're going to go ahead and launch visual impression from a worksheet that I have created here. Once we're inside of visual impression, what I'm going to do is select a tool in there called Visual Materials. Visual Materials is how we work with furniture objects for manufacturers that do not have enrichment, so that I could actually apply my own finishes. But Visual Materials is also going to allow me to bring in my own finishes. One thing I always like to tell any customers, prospective customers that I'm talking with, is that the finishes that you download or you might capture, they're really as good as how they're shot. So sometimes I have to play with materials a little bit to get them to actually tile correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with the chairs that I have in the scene because I want to apply my own finish to them. So when I go into Visual Materials, as you know, we have generic and supplier finishes, so I actually can apply anything from the suppliers that we provide to you. But if I'm going to do my own, I'm actually going to create a palette. So in this case, we'll just do one for today's webinar. And once I create that palette, what I'm going to be able to do is select the image. So the image I've downloaded, I do happen to have on my desktop right now. So let's just go ahead and grab that. And I'm going to give it a name. So let's just do I can go ahead and classify this. Classifying is actually kind of important because the thing is that based on how I classify it, it will actually take on the properties of that classification. So when I go to render it, it'll render correctly. I always say, like with woods and stuff, or laminates, if they need to be shiny, you can actually make them take on those types of properties. Now what's important here is your physical width and your physical height. The nice thing about this is if I don't get it right the first time, I can always go back here and change it. Now, looking at the specifications for Chimera, I know what the repeat is on this, so it's 8.3, and I know my width is going to be 10.97. Like I said, if it's not right the first time, don't worry, you can always go back and change that. So we're just going to go ahead and save that, and I'm just going to minimize Visual Materials at this point. Highlight the object, and then I'm going to go ahead and launch materials. Now, if I were selecting standard finishes, I would have done all of that here. But in this case, when I'm working with my own materials or materials that I might need to pull out of other libraries within Visual Materials, I'm going to go to the Advanced tab. When I go to the Advanced tab, you'll see there's a check mark here depending on how that's checked, I'm actually going to see these beautiful colors, which are actually the AutoCAD layers that this was created on. And obviously those layers are very important so that I apply this fabric to the proper place. So when I go into my little webinar color palette here, you're going to see the swatch that I brought in. And I know I need it to go on this layer, but I'm also going to need it to go on the seat. So I'm going to go ahead and drop it right here on the green layer. So here we have applied the finish. Now, the way that the most, I would say, efficient way to do this or effective way to do this is there is a section down here to apply to more items. So in this case, these chairs are all the same part number, so I'm going to tell it to apply to all occurrences of this item. So when I hit the apply button, I've taken it from one and pushed it out to the other. So if you're working with Visual Materials, it's easy to apply to one and then push out to all the other objects that you have that match that. One of the other common questions we had was working with different scenes outside of the windows. We have done over the last 3 months a series of how do you do that videos, and what we're going to do is provide you with a link to go to those how-to videos. What I've done is I actually did one on how to work with images outside the window, and I think the best thing for everyone is to actually view that video. It'll talk you through how to apply it to multiple windows. So when working with multiple windows, there's a website you can visit, imagesplitter.net. The nice thing with this imagesplitter.net is it allows you to upload any image that you have and then split the image based on how many windows that you have. And then it will download a zip file, and within that zip file will be all the images that you created from that. And then using visual materials, just like I showed previously, you're going to be able to bring those images into a palette and then simply select a window and then be able to apply that.
My name is Aaron Hall. I've been with 2020 Tech Support for about 10 years. You might have talked to me in the last few years if you recall on the support line or email us. Today I'm going to be answering a few more questions. The first one here is from Abby in Missouri. She says, in 2020 Giza, how do you easily move the furniture that is in a group? So what I'd like to show here is there's a couple ways to do this in Giza. I've just drawn up a simple little small station here. It's nothing fancy. This solution kind of is scalable. So if you're doing it, you could do it with 2 items. I could do it with just these 2 lateral files down here. I could do it with the workstation. I could do it with a whole floor of furniture if I wanted to. But probably the simplest thing to do is first just select the items that you want to group together, that you want to move together. So I'm just going to click and drag a box across, and that should highlight my little workstation here. And then what I want to do is right-click on any of the items. You want to make sure you hit an item, because if I click out here, I'm going to lose my selection. So I want to make sure I actually click on something. And then come down here in the menu to Utilities, and then Make Group. And what this is going to do is this is going to lock these items together. So now if I unselect it and just try to click one piece, you can see it just selects the entire group, not just the one piece that I'm clicking on. What that allows me to do is now I can click and drag this whole thing, and it's going to be kind of choppy. I forgot I didn't want that chair in there because that slows things down. But you'll see it as I drag it around, it moves the whole thing as one unit. Now I got kind of an artifacting effect here that you'll quite often see in Giza when you move or delete an item. So I'm just going to refresh my screen to get rid of those artifacts. So that's about it for grouping the items together. Once you've locked them, if you don't want them to be locked anymore, you can undo the group simply by selecting it, right-clicking on it, and again you go to Utilities, and the last option here is Ungroup. So now that I've ungrouped it, if I want to move one individual piece, I can do that. So that's pretty much it for the simple method. There's a more complex method you can use involving typicals, which this comes in handy, particularly when you want to move the items from one drawing to another. So what I can do is, again, I've highlighted the things I want to be my group, or my typical in this case. And again, I'm going to right-click on any one of the items and choose Utilities. But instead of going to Make Group, I'm going to go to Make Typical. And that brings up this little typical window up here. I'm going to move it to the center of the screen so it's easier to see. And the first thing I want to do here, I can see it didn't list the folder where it's saving this, and it doesn't have a file name. So the first thing I want to do is establish those by clicking this Browse button right here. And it looks like it's defaulting to my typicals folder, which is the CDA folder. That's just fine. I'm going to call my typical test. Any valid file name should work here. I would avoid using any special characters though, or spaces or anything kind of weird. Just letters and numbers should work fine. So now that I've got my file name set up, you can see it says the folder that it's going to save it into, and it says the file name right here. The next thing I want to do is choose what I'm making the typical from. In this case, I've made a selection ahead of time, so I'm going to do selected elements. If I do entire drawing, then it would do everything that you see, including the lateral files, which I don't want. So I want selected elements in this case. The next thing is we want the origin, which is where this typical is going to attach to your cursor when you go to insert it again. You'll kind of see where that comes into play in the next part where I bring it back into the drawing. So in this case, we've got a few different choices: upper left, center, lower left. I'm going to use the choose point here and just click the button to the right, which allows me to pick a point on the drawing. And I'm just going to kind of pick about where this chair starts. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you where you put the point. Now at this point, the Save button is active. So now I can click Save to save my typical. And depending on the size of your typical, it might take a few seconds to save. This one saved really quickly because it's just a small station with just a little bit of furniture in it. But if you're doing a large group of items, it could take like 30 seconds or a minute to save. So just keep that in mind. If it seems like Giza stops responding there for a little bit, it should come back. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place another one in here to show you how this typical actually inserts. So I'm going to go up to the Draw menu up here at the top left. And then from Draw, I'm going to go to Typical. And again, I'm going to move this window over so you can see it a little bit better. It's not stacked on the other windows. Now, if you've just recently saved a typical, it's going to automatically remember your last one. So you can see this one's already preloaded with my test CDA file that I just saved. So if this is a drawing that I had done a couple days ago and worked on other stuff since, it might not be in there, in which case you can either click the drop-down box here to look for it, or you can click the Browse button to browse and find your typical file. But since it remembered the last one, I'm just going to use that. The placement mode, you almost always would use single. You can do it as a grid or a radial placement if you wanted to get kind of fancy and lay out a bunch of chairs or a bunch of stations in a pattern. But in most cases, single is going to be the simplest and easiest method to work with. And then finally, I talked about grouping just before making this typical. You can choose this checkbox here to actually weld these pieces together as a group when you insert them. I'm going to leave that off though. And by not having that, or by having that turned off, that means when I insert this, they'll still be individual items. I still click the individual pieces and manipulate them. And then finally I'm going to click Place. And now you can see this rectangle that goes around my cursor is sort of the footprint of the station that I saved as a typical. And you can see that my cursor is kind of in the center where I picked that origin point when I was saving it. So that's where that origin point comes into play. And so basically I just look for where I want to place it and left click, and it drops in my typical like that. So that's another way to kind of move stuff around or copy and paste stuff into a different area in this case, but I could even do this in a new drawing. If I started up a new blank Giza drawing, I could still place that same typical into there. So it's kind of like the copy-paste that you would get from another document. And those are probably the two easiest ways to group items and move them together. CAP has a corollary. It has a grouping function in AutoCAD. I might be able to show you that real quick. Let's see here. I think I had an example drawing. Yep. So that example was for Giza, but for CAP users, you can kind of do the same thing. So I'm just selecting the items here in AutoCAD, and I can make them into a group. And now that whole thing is welded together. So I should be able to move it just as a group. So that's another way to do it. And AutoCAD, it works pretty much the same way. If I want to undo the group, I can come into the group menu and ungroup it. And You can see now I can move the bits individually. So not too fancy there. If you wanted to do something like the typical in AutoCAD, we do have cap standards. So those will work similar to the typical method, except with cap standards, you'd be saving them to your custom catalog file instead of saving it to its own individual typical file. And then with that done, we're going to move on to the next question here, which is, if I can get my slide over. There we go. In 2020 CAP and 2020 Worksheet, how do I sort my content list? How do I sort my content list to be in alphabetical order? And there's a couple ways to do this. So I'm going to switch back over here to, I'm going to switch back to AutoCAD first, because actually what I want to do is I want to close AutoCAD. It's usually not good to do this in AutoCAD because you'll get a warning message saying that you have to be running as administrator, and it'll make you restart AutoCAD. And it's kind of a pain to do it that way. So I typically do it in the Worksheet program. And the first way that you can reorder the catalog list, and we're talking about this list over here where you see right now it says All Steel, Demo, Herman Miller, Hahn. Sometimes this thing gets out of order. And so you want to straighten that out. Or maybe, let's say I work with one of these other catalogs that's on the bottom, and I want it to be near the top because I use it a lot more than the others. So what I would do is I'd come in here to Tools, and then into Preferences. And then in this Preferences window on the left-hand side, there's this little blue book icon called Content. And you see this lists the catalogs here. So I can come in here, and I want to click on the name of the catalog I want to move. So for example, I'm just going to use Technion because it's at the bottom right now. And to move it up, I just want to select it by clicking the name. You don't want to click the little checkbox here, because if you do that, it's actually going to uncheck that catalog. And then depending on your settings, it might actually hide that catalog. So just be careful not to accidentally uncheck it. You just want to highlight the line like it is here. And then use the arrow keys up here to move the catalog up or down the list. Now that's the simple method, and that works best for if you want to move just one or two catalogs. It's not great if I have a whole list of all the manufacturers, which there's many more than I have installed here. To reorder that list, that'd be kind of painful to go through this way. Basically, I'm going to cancel out of here. Basically, once you get done moving it here, you want to just apply that change and click OK. And then it should let you, or you'll have to restart Worksheet, but then the catalog list should reflect your order change there. The fast way to do it is we want to close out of all of our 2020 programs. And then depending on your Windows version, it's kind of, there's a couple different ways to find this file. I'm in Windows 8 right now, and Windows 10 has the same search function. So if you're on 8 or 10, you can search for our Catalog Diagnostics tool. And there you see I just typed Catalog D, and the first result over here on the right is Catalog Diagnostics. So I'm going to click that. But a lot of times you'll get this user account control warning. Just say yes there. That's perfectly fine. And it takes a few seconds, but then it opens up this diagnostics window. I'm going to close this window in the background here. So, and when you look at this diagnostics, it should list all of the catalogs that you have installed. It's actually going to list them a couple of times, once for each program. And the thing that we're really interested in here is this Rebuild CAP Content button down here. If I click that, it's going to bring up a little warning that says this will remove the existing content file. If you added any manufacturers or catalogs through Preferences in Worksheet or CAP Designer, you will need to re-add them after this operation. Do you want to continue? What that basically means is if you have alternate manufacturers, like for older pricing, this is not going to take those into account, so it's probably going to remove them from the content file, and you'll have to manually re-add them. So that's one scenario where you might not want to do this. But otherwise, if you just got a standard catalog install, you just install the catalogs from the DVDs every month and you don't make any weird changes, it's perfectly safe just to come in here and say yes. It's real quick. Mine says it's already rebuilt, so I just click OK and then close down the diagnostics. And when you come back into CAP or Worksheet, you should see, if I can get the program open. Just going to take a few seconds here. There we go. Maybe I didn't click it. You should see that your content list is back in alphabetical order. Usually, when I say alphabetical order, it's by the manufacturer code, not by the catalog description. So there will be a few where their code is a different, it starts with a different letter than their actual description, so they might come down in a different spot in the list. But otherwise, it should be alphabetical. And that's basically all there is to resorting the catalogs. The diagnostics tool is really fast if you can do that. So I'm going to switch back to our next question here. And this is from Jennifer from Rhode Island. She says, how do you compare new and old 2020 CAP worksheets to automatically come up with a need-to-order list? And basically what this whole thing focuses on is our 2020 Compare tool, which I've kind of got a screenshot here in the slide. This tool is designed to do exactly what she's asking for. You want to take an old worksheet or an existing worksheet and compare it with a new or required worksheet and get the difference so you can see what you need to order or what's left over from the order. So what I'm going to do here is switch back to the worksheet program. Oh, I closed out of it. So there's a couple ways to get to that Compare tool. I'm going to do it from Worksheet. You can do it from the Windows Start menu. You can even get to it, I think, from AutoCAD, from CAP. But it's probably easier to do it here from Worksheet. I don't need to have any particular worksheet file open. You can see right now I'm just working with an untitled blank worksheet. So I'm going to go into Tools. And then from the Tools menu, I'm going to go to Compare. And now it's launched that Compare tool we saw in the screenshot on that slide. The way it works here is up at the top we have two boxes for input. The one on the left is the existing worksheet. That's the one that already has your existing furniture or an old floor plan. So I'm going to click Add there. And then on my desktop, I've saved a couple files, and I conveniently named one of them Existing. And on the right, I'm going to go to Required, which will be my new furniture layout. And again, I've got to go to my desktop and find my Required worksheet. And then that's all we need to do to set up the inputs. So it's going to compare these two worksheets against each other. And then based on what I choose down here, it's going to give us several outputs. So looking at the output section, we've got a few choices. We've got a new worksheet, an excess worksheet, and a reusable worksheet. And each of these have a little checkbox next to them. And so if I don't want, let's say I don't care about excess and I don't care about reusable, I just want new, I can leave just the new one checked. And what that's going to do is when I do the compare, it's only going to take the items that are in the required worksheet but not in the existing worksheet and create a new worksheet from those. So it's a worksheet of just my new products. In other words, the stuff I need to order. If you're curious, you can turn on excess and reusable. You know, it really depends on your situation, what you need. For my demonstration, I'm going to do all three just so that we can see what they do. And then another useful thing is on the right here, there's a report option. By default, it's set to no report. And I typically will change it to either the text report or the CSV report. Because what this does is if I do text report, for example, it'll bring up a little text document that tells me the overall results of the search. So I can kind of get an overall view of all three of these worksheets just from this little text document. It's kind of a good way to kind of check and make sure that your compare did what you wanted to do before you go and open up these actual worksheets. The CSV report kind of does the same thing, except the CSV format is something that you can open in Microsoft Excel. So you could turn it into sort of a spreadsheet. And then the final part of this, and kind of a key part, is the comparison criteria. We need to tell this what we're actually looking for when we compare. And the way it works is anything that's checked down here, it's going to compare. And if they're different, it's going to treat those items as two different items. So I'm just going to check a few of these. Usually I just kind of go down the left option or the left column here and get those. That would be kind of a basic comparison. It's just looking at the manufacturer code, the catalog code, the product number, and the option number. And if those all match, it counts the items as the same. If you have a more complex project, you might want to check the alias or the tag columns because you might not necessarily want, let's say you got two chairs in two different offices tagged differently. You might not want those compared or to equate this to the same type of item. You might want those split out differently. So if you do that, then by checking the whatever tag field you use, it'll still keep those separate. But once I basically have all my criteria picked, I'm going to come down here to the left and click on Compare. It tells me the operation completed successfully. So that's this little message here. And I'm just going to OK that. And then it also opened up my text report. Remember, I selected the text report. So that gives me this little file here. And if we look at this, I know I didn't show you the worksheets ahead of time. I probably should have done that now that I think about it. Basically, all I did is I added a couple of lateral files to the required worksheet. Everything else was the same. So if we look at the list here, my reuse column is everything that's in both of the worksheets. And so if I scroll down, I can see that almost everything is reused except the lateral files that I added, and those are actually in the new column. So, and then if I keep scrolling, I can see the rest of this stuff is reused. So that's kind of how I use this text document, because if I didn't see this 2 here for the lateral files that I needed, I know I needed new. If that 2 was in the wrong column, or if it was over here in the reuse column, something wasn't right, and I'd go back and double check my settings, or maybe even check my design to make sure that I didn't make a mistake in what I placed. Now that I know it did what I wanted to do, I'm just going to close out of my report file, and we still have these 3 worksheet files that I created. Now the excess is probably empty because there's nothing excess between my 2 worksheets. But if I go and look for the worksheet files, and you can see it saved them here in my Documents folder. So if I go open those guys up, I'd open right to them. I'm going to start with a new one. If this did what I wanted it to do, there should just be 2 lateral files in here. And there is. There's my 2 painted lateral files. So that one worked. And now if this was my order, I would just go ahead and sift it out, or well, option it and then sift it out, and I'd be ready to go. Likewise, I can look at my reused and see what's left over, or what's used between the 2, I should say. And this is the rest of the items that were in those 2 worksheets. And that's the basis of the compare command, or compare tool. I'm going to go ahead and close that guy out. And we'll switch back to our next question here. And that is, how do you set up custom reports? And this comes from Linda from New York. And this is kind of a big topic, so I'm going to try to just give an overview, because we could really go in depth in this, and there's actually a section on this in our training classes. So I'm not going to try to cover all of the things you can do with the report designer, but I'll try to give you an overview so that you can at least get started creating your own reports. And the easiest way to start is to find one of our generic reports that kind of come built in with worksheet. So I'm just going to use the standard quote here, and I'm just going to apply the standard quote to any worksheet. And it does take a few seconds for it to create a report, so we just kind of have to wait for it. Okay, so now I've got the standard quote here. Now this isn't the report that you want, but it's the one we're going to base our custom report off. So what we want to do is once we have this guy generated, we want to edit this to make it our own special report. To do that, there's a couple ways. You can click this little book with the kind of starburst icon on the corner, or you can go to the Reports menu up here and click on Edit Report Design. Both of those should open up our Report Designer program, which is what's on the center of the screen right now. I'm going to maximize it to make it a little easier to work with. And now we're actually editing that report that we just applied to our worksheet. So the first thing you probably want to do is save out this report as a new name. So we'll just do File, Save As. Right now it's called Standard Quote. I'm going to call it My Standard Quote. So I'm just going to put a My at the beginning of it, so I know it's mine. There we go. So now we have that saved out to a new name. That means if I mess this up or goof it up somehow, I can always go back to the other standard quote and start over. Once I have that done, we just need to take a look at this. There's not a whole lot of fields here or a whole lot of areas. Basically, you have the top pull-down menu system up here, which gives you some functions in the report. You've got a toolbar that gives you, it starts off with your new report, open, and save buttons, and it has a couple other commands. The thing you'll probably use this mostly for is the grouping and these little toggles up here, which turn on and off different sections of the report, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The next big section you have here is the Field Explorer on the left-hand side of the screen. So you can see right now it's showing me the data fields, and it gives me the different sections that are available in the report. And then the big section in the middle here is the actual work area for your report. This is the template for your report. So what you're seeing over here is what's actually going to be printed on your page. I should qualify that because what you see a lot of the fields have labels to them. So anything that's actually a value field, you'll see the value for that field. So for example, the ship to here, it's not going to say ship to name. It's actually going to have the name there, the person's name, if you fill out that part of the data. But this is how it's going to be laid out on the page when you go to print it. So a couple real quick things that I'll show you how to do. One is you probably don't want to use our 2020 logo. You'd probably want to use one of your own. And it's really easy to change the logo. What you want to do is double-click the image file where it says 2020. That brings us into the Field Properties window. And you can see right now it's pointing to a logo file on my computer somewhere. If I wanted to change that, I would just click the three little dots over here and go find a picture, which, you know what, I don't think I have any saved on this computer, but you'd go find your logo file and select it. And the logo can be anything, a bitmap, JPEG, PNG. Honestly, I find bitmaps seem to work better than JPEGs. So if you have your logo in a BMP or bitmap format, that's probably the way to go. But basically, you select your file, click Open. Since I don't have one, I can't really switch it right now. But you should see the logo update to your own company logo once you do that. Another thing you can do is you can add your own fields to this report. So for example, if I want to add some custom text up here at the top, I've got kind of an empty space up here in the corner. What I would do is I'd come over here, and the way you add a field is you want to click the field that you want to add. In this case, I'm going to Reusable Fields and Text. I'm going to click it and then just drag. And you'll see as I'm dragging it, I get the no symbol or the bar sinister, a little circle with a line through it. But once I get into the actual report area, then it kind of changes the cursor back to an arrow with a little square indicating that it's dragging something. And then I drop that field where I want it to go. I just let go of the mouse cursor. And I forgot that I've maxed out, or this report actually has the limit of text fields. You can only have 10 per section. And I forgot that this one has that limit. So what I'm going to do is just delete one of these fields. There we go. Now bring the text back over. So just repeating what I did there. And you see now when I drag it in, it gives me a rich text field. This is kind of a special field. What this rich text field allows me to do is I can type whatever text I want in here, and this will show up on the report exactly how I type it. So right now it starts out saying rich text field, just to let you know what type of field it is, but it's actually blank. So if I print this, it would be empty. So I just double-clicked it there to bring up the field properties window, and now I can type whatever I want, if I can type. So you see that, and now that's what it says on the field. You can change the font, you can change the size of the text and everything to make it look how you prefer it to look. But that's the basics of adding a rich text field like that. Another thing you might want to do is add a field to one of the sections in the lower parts of the report. So for example, right now my product detail just has my line number, my quantity, my part number, the description, the cell field, and the extended cell field. Maybe I want to add the list price to that. So the first thing I need to do is come down to that product detail section, which is right down here, and make some room, because right now I don't have a lot of room. So I'm going to stretch it out a little bit, and I'm actually going to shrink down the description, because I know I won't have enough room the way it was situated. So that gave me this little gap here between the description and the cell. And so what I want to do now is I want to go get the list price, and I want to put it in there. And to do that, I'll need to come over here to the Field Explorer again. And earlier when I clicked, it compressed down my data field, so I got to expand that back out so I can see my sections. And it's kind of important when you're adding a field from one of these sections, you want to make sure you match it up with the field or the section that you're going into. So for example, right now I'm doing the product detail section. So I want to get my list price from the product detail. So I expand out product detail. It already tells me the fields that are in there. So for example, line number has a little green check mark number or check mark next to it because it's already in the section. So I said I was looking for lists, so I'm going to go down and look for the list price, which is right here. And again, we just click, hold down the mouse button and drag it, and we get a little circle with the line. But when we get over the report, it switches back over to an arrow. And then once I get about where I want it, I'm just going to let go. And you can see it dropped it right in that gap I had. And now I can kind of move it around, adjust it, use these little green grips on the corners and on the sides to expand out the field if I need to. Now this field's different from that reusable text field that I put in at the top. And what's different about it is this is actually a value. It's actually going to take a value from your worksheet and print it in here. So if I try to edit this field by double-clicking on it, I'm not going to get any options where I can type and put in text. It won't let me do that because the value for this is actually going to come from the worksheet itself, not from the report design. But I can still change the size of the text. So if I wanted to make it bold, I can do that by checking the bold box up here. I can change the font to one of these other Windows fonts. I can change the size if need be. You can even change the color and put borders around it if you like. But I'm not going to get too fancy with it. I just wanted to basically show you how to get that in there. And that's the basics of Report Designer. The last thing I want to do is once I've made my changes to my report, I would come into the File menu and click Save to save those changes. And we have to remember that when we saved it originally, we put, well, I put the word my in front of it, so it was different from the standard report. So now if I go back and I want to test it, I have to reapply my report design, and I have to do the one that says my standard quote because right now Worksheet thinks we're using the default standard quote one. So I want to use this one here in the list that says my standard quote. And again, the report takes a few seconds to generate. And now you can see in my report up here in the top right, it says I can type whatever I want because that's what I typed in my rich text field. And then this bold line here, this is that list price that I inserted. So basically using those few principles, you should be able to edit one of these reports and get it looking pretty spiffy. There are a few more advanced things, like I said, that get covered in our training classes, but really that's beyond the scope of what we can do in a webinar like this. So I'm going to switch back over. Let's see here. And I think, yep, the next part I'm going to hand off over to Chad, and Chad should be able to give his part of the presentation now. Thank you, Chad.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. I'm going to share out my presentation. Right now you should be able to see the slide. Let me begin by saying that the questions that I'm answering today are, they're not covering everyday processes the way that Aaron and Denise covered earlier. The things that I'm covering are specific within VI. They're powerful and they provide specific output for users, but they're not something that you're going to use every day. At the same time, they are very useful and they fulfill a certain need that users might have. So we're going to begin with this question here from Terry from Illinois, is how do I use the animations feature in 2020 Visual Impression? Animations is a feature that we have within VI. It allows you to do a walkthrough within Visual Impression, create a video, and you can send that off to your customers. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Visual Impression here. All right. You should see the scene that I have up here on the screen. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get into presentation mode. I'm going to move that off to the side a little bit. Presentation. So there's materials, room, and presentation. Flip over to presentation mode and you're going to see manage animations. Now I already have an animation created. I'm going to walk through creating a new one. So we click manage animations and that throws us back over to the scene. I'm going to create a new animation here. So this is going to be my second one. But before we get started, I want you to take a look at the controls that are along the bottom of the screen here. The first thing that you might notice is that it's locked into the SQ mode that is disabled. I'll explain why that is in a little bit here. But while we're in here, we want to make sure that our lighting is the way that we want it to be. Make sure that the intensity is the right amount. Make sure that the lighting type is the right amount. If you have light emitting windows or doors, you want to make sure that the sun is set proper. You also want to make sure that you see all the items that you want to be in the animation. You may have hidden some items for some reason or another. Sometime in editing this scene, you want to make sure that everything is on the way that you want them to be. You also want to get to the first point where you're going to start the animation. Now, what I do sometimes is I will actually create a snapshot of this viewpoint. You can also just set the home position to the current camera location. Either one of those things will work for the same result, for the same purpose. The reason we do that is if while we're making this, if we make some kind of mistake and we need to get back, we'll have those viewpoints to get back to. All right. So if I want to rename this animation, I just have to hit this little triangle and I hit rename. I'm going to call it test, which is a very creative name because I'm a creative person. So it's called test. All right. First thing we do here is we're going to read the instructions, which is always a good thing as well. And it tells you that you need to hit a plus button to save each position. So I'm going to hit a plus because this is the first place we're going to have as our first step. And now you'll see that it has transition time and wait time. I'm going to get to those a little bit later in the question here also. So next thing I need to do is pick my next point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in. That moves us through the scene. Move up a little bit. Change the viewpoint, however you like. And then I hit another plus. And that inserts another step. Zoom. Move up. down a little bit because I'm not 8 feet tall. Change the perspective a little bit. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm just using the controls to move me around the scene. To get me the places where I'm going to stop during the animation. Now some of those may end up looking a little goofy in the video, in the output that we create, because it'll appear that I'm walking backwards. But that's okay for our purposes. It serves the purpose. So I'm going to go back to my home view. So this is where I started. So just to see how things are, I'm going to hit play here, and it's going to run through the steps that I have. And these transition and wait times, we will be changing these in a moment here. But I want to play through it just the way that it is right now, and you'll understand why we're going to change the transition and wait times. So I'm going to hit play. And right now, what it is it's waiting at the first point. So the first thing we're going to do in the edits is we're going to change that. So we rush ahead to the next point. We wait here a moment, go to the next point, wait there a moment, and so forth. Now, the transition time is the time it takes you to get from one point to the next. And the reason that we're going to be changing those is because sometimes spinning around might give you like a little bit of vertigo, or make you dizzy in some way, because it does it so quickly. So for the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the transition and wait time for the first point down as low as we can. Transition time, I'm going to knock that up a couple of seconds. We're going to knock the wait time down. If you had a specific thing that you wanted to point out to someone during a video, you can leave the wait time where it is, or even dial it up as much as 10 seconds. You can hit pause, and then what it'll do is you'll have to actually hit a control to move through the scene more. We're gonna just dial these to this. Also in here, you'll see that you can add a comment. So I'm going to add a comment, and we're going to have this. This is just a throwaway comment that I'm putting in for the demonstration. But the reason you might put these comments in is, as you come to a particular point in your scene during the animation, you might want to call attention to something. So I see that this scene is looking at these Andy Warhol Campbell's Soup knockoffs. So I'm going to put a little note in here, and we'll see how that pops up on the screen. Okay, so now we've dialed the things in we think the way that we want them to be. Let's hit play again. It's a little bit smoother there. As it comes to this point, it's going to pop up the comment that we put in. So it's a little bit smoother because we've lengthened out the transition time. Now we're here at the end. So if we wanted to adjust some of these, make them last a little bit longer, we can do that. I'm going to stretch out this one where we put the comment in, so we can stand and look at the soup cans for just a little bit. And now I think we are to the point where we can go ahead and make the recording. And when we click the record button, it's going to pop up a message for us here. Actually, it's going to ask me first where it's going to save the file. It's going to give it by default, it's going to give it the animation title that we put in. I'm going to hit save. Now this is the message I was talking about. The recording note says, do not place anything over the visual impression window during the recording process. Now the reason that you don't want to put anything over top of it, including your cursor as it runs through the recording process, is that it's not actually recording behind the scenes, it's recording what's on your screen. So if you drag your cursor across the screen while it's doing the recording, your cursor will actually be in the output file. If you bring another window over top of this, or while it's recording, a Skype message pops up from a coworker, that will actually be in the video. So you want to make sure that everything is off of your screen so that it can't be seen. So I'm going to hit OK here. It's going through a record. our scene animation has been recorded now. I'm going to bring up a File Explorer window here. Let's go look at the output. It's going to be in my documents. All right, here are the recorded videos. I'm going to go ahead and open up this test one here. So that shows the recorded video. Something you'll notice at the very beginning is something that I should have accounted for before I made the recording. I mentioned that I was going to save the first point of the animation, and I should have gone back to that before I started the recording, because the first thing you see when you play this recording is it whips from the end all the way back up to the front. So before you start your recording, go back to that first point again, and that'll make sure that there's no whiplash from moving around within the scene. So you'd be able to do that by either going to the Save Snapshot or the Home, or here within the scene, you can actually click, change that a little bit. You can click it and it'll return you that point too, right off of the saved point within the animation. So there we go. That's how we create an animation. Okay, the next question that we have is, what can I do to improve the resolution when creating high-resolution renderings? That's from Fernando in New York. This is another one of the pretty specific functions that we have within the software. This was actually added at a specific user request. The images you create within Visual Impression, when you do a snapshot, they are the resolution of whatever your screen is. So if you're on a 1920 by 1080 screen, 1200 by 1080 screen, that's the size of the image you're going to create. And that limits how big you can print something out, because the bigger something gets, it gets a little fuzzier. You might have seen this when you blow up like a snapshot that you might take with your phone or with a camera. So I'm going to bring up Visual Impression again. I'm going to get off of the presentation view, go back to the presentation view, and here we are, we're in Custom Render. So to manage animations, we're going to click on Custom Render, and that throws us back to the scene. First thing we're going to do, like we did before, is we're going to look at the controls along the bottom. You see that there's quite a few that are missing. We do have a few that we can still play with. Want to make sure that the rendering mode is the way that you want it to be. I'm going to do HQ. I'm going to wait a moment for it to render the scene out so it has nice shadows and light. And I specifically mention that because when I've been doing these custom renders in the past, if you do the first one and you set it up the way that we are here, where I do HQ and I get it just the way I want, I create the rendering, and it doesn't turn out the way that I want, a lot of times I'll go back in and I'll do it again, and that is the thing that I forget. I forget step 0 of making sure that the render quality is the way that I want it to be. And as we go through, you're going to realize that the render quality is an important first step, because when you start the rendering, once you start it, you can't stop it. So it's going to go through and it's going to do its thing, and it may take minutes depending on the size of the render that you're asking for. So you're kind of committed once you hit that Start Rendering button. Same way as we did in animation, we can change the light intensity, we can change the direction of the light and the light types. We just want to make sure that we're at the point we want to be. So the first thing we're going to see here in the Custom Render window are the render size. So the render size, this is actually saying how many pixels the image is going to be. Now, pixels isn't something that most people really work with, but it's the number of dots that are on the screen. So how many dots on a display do I want this to be? By default, it's 2048 by 1152, and the aspect ratio is 16 by 9. 16 by 9 is what the current display is on my laptop here. You can change this, and as you change the aspect ratio, it actually changes the numbers. So that's an important thing also to remember about this small little control. If I change one thing, it's going to change other things. If I change the aspect ratio, it's going to change the height pixel number to match that ratio. So we're going to start off with a 2048, 1152. That's just a basic size. There's a PPI That's the pixels per inch. That's what basically means like how close those dots on your screen are going to be. This is sort of like dots per inch on a printer. Dots per inch is something that is more tactile. It's something you can actually print something out, and if you printed it at a low enough resolution, you'd actually be able to see individual dots of ink on the page. This basically determines how crisp the image is going to be. 72 is the default for most images that you might take with a regular plain old snapshot camera. When you create a digital image, we have the ability to make these much more dense. And depending on your video card, you may actually be able to reach up into these really high numbers. I'm going to leave it at 100. And notice that when I set it to 100 ppi and 2048 by 1152, it tells me that my printout, if I physically wanted to print this, the native size would be 20 inches by 11 inches. If I change that to 72, it goes to 28 by 16. So the lower my PPI, the bigger the images will be. Now, there are some good and bad things to that. The good thing is that you get a bigger size. The bad thing is that it's a little bit lower pixels per inch, even though it's the same resolution. It's the same. There's still 2,048 pixels wide, but there's only 72 of them in an inch. That's why the image changes based on this number. So I'm going to do a quick render here. When you click render, it says, please wait, your image is being rendering. This can't be canceled. It may appear that your visual impression is not doing something that's good, or that it's had some kind of a problem. Right now on my screen, you'll see that it went to white. It whited everything out. There's a little bit of distortion on the screen, and it says that it's not responding. Now this is normal. I've done renders of this size before, and I haven't had a problem. I'm going to really hope that that's how it is here too, which it turns out it is. And here's that last one that I just did. Now, I mentioned it gives you that message because what you're doing is you're telling the program to create an image that is something that you can't see. Now, what the problem with that is that you may be asking your video card to do more than it possibly can. You may be asking your computer to do things that it doesn't have the resources to do. So when I'm in this custom render, let's go back and do another one. If I dial this up to like 7,000, and leave it at 16 by 9, I can then do a printout of 70 inches by 39. So the whole appeal of this is that you can create an image that's very large. It'll show well in a very large display, or you can print it out very large. That's why people ask for it. The downside is that you can actually get yourself into a situation where you'll crash visual impression, and that's what that message was about. It's telling you that we're doing something here that is pushing the boundaries of the application, and it may ask your system to do too much. Know ahead of time that this may crash. And I have a screen here. This is what you'll see if you push it too hard. And in preparing for this webinar, I created progressively larger files to be able to show you examples. And when I got to about 7,000, this is a message that came up. So my video card maxes out between 6,000 and 7,000, somewhere in there. I didn't get a fine number, but it's somewhere in there. So also while I'm in this video editor, I'm going to show you some images. So this image here, this is a native image that I took in a snapshot that I took within Visual Impression. So this shows that it's 11.29 by 7.04 inches. If I were to print this out, that is the native size of it. I wouldn't have any distortion if I printed it as that. Now here, this is a 3000 by 1688 file that I created, and its native size is 31.25 inches by 17.58. This is a 4,000 pixel by 2,250 pixel. And then this is a 5,500 one. Now, the viewer that I'm working with here, it's shrinking it to fit for you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show it actual size. So if I were to show this on display, this is actual size for that item. This is actual size for this render. And this is the actual size for this render. So you'll see that these images this is the actual size for this particular one. But you'll see that the setting that we changed, it does affect the image. Some editors, when you open them up, you're going to open up a normal snapshot, and you're going to open up a bigger one, and you're going to say, well, what's the difference between the two? The viewer that you're looking at most often will shrink it to fit. So then you can resize it. Like if you drop it into Word or PowerPoint or something like that, you can resize it, and you can make it. It'll preserve the sharpness while still allowing it to be scaled up large. So that was those are my two questions that I had asked. They're pretty specific, but they are powerful functions within the software. So I want to say thank you today for joining us. If you have any questions, or go to 2020spaces.com. There's a lot of information out there. Thank you. Have a good day.